Hey guys, it's Danny. Today it is time for something new for my channel. We are going to do a reaction video. It's happening, guys. I'm going viral with reaction videos. No, actually, it's not necessarily gonna be a reaction, but we will analyze an article that I got recommended by Google about 2 weeks ago, and I found that it's a very interesting article, and I thought it would be a good idea to talk about it in a video because I know very well how confusing orchids can be in comparison to all other houseplants, especially if you've not grown a lot of them. But the point of this video is actually to be educational. So we're not going to poke fun of the article, which you will see has some inaccuracies, has some good parts as well. We're just going to try and decipher it, better said. And yeah, try out this new style of videos as well. Righty, so before we start, don't forget to give this video a like if you end up enjoying it and it helps you out with your orchids. And why not subscribe? I post multiple times a week and it's completely free. But if you're feeling a little extra, do consider further supporting the channel by becoming a member, checking out the affiliate links down below, checking out the merch, or using the super thanks option down below my videos. Righty, so let's get to the article. This has been posted in the idealhome.co.uk publication. I don't know if it's a hard paper publication as well. It's online for sure. And the article is titled How to Propagate Orchids and Grow This Expensive and Beautiful Flower for Free. For those of you who are still new to orchids, propagation of orchids is a tricky subject. It's definitely not like other plants, especially with Phalaenopsis. It's not easy to propagate them. Seeds don't work. They do not survive if you just sprinkle them over some bark medium. There's a whole process to germinating orchid seeds that involves rather laboratories, not home environments. So you can understand how intrigued I was by the title. And I thought, well, of course, we're gonna talk about keikis and all of those things. It's not about keikis. Alrighty, so how do we propagate orchids? It's a question many of us have pondered over the years. Absolutely. Because orchids, yeah, they're not cheap, especially some of the flower shop ones. They're not the most expensive plants, but compare them to, I don't know, a spider plant? Yes, they're kind of expensive. And there is a good reason for that. They grow incredibly slow. Did you know that most of the flower shop Phalaenopsis you find in flower shops are at least 3 to 4 years old? It takes a long time to bring them to a mature enough state to bloom. So after the introduction, the article, which by the way, you will find linked below in the description as well, it goes on to the topic of propagating orchids by division, which, if you didn't know, yes, it is a thing. Some orchids can be propagating by dividing their rhizome. Sadly, those orchids are not Phalaenopsis orchids. They are orchids we call sympodials, such as Cattleya orchids, oncidiums, dendrobiums, and a few others. But orchids such as Phalaenopsis and vandas, they're monopodial. So we cannot divide the rhizome. So here we have a quote from Mr. Morris Hankinson, and he goes on to say, division involves separating a mature orchid plant into smaller sections, each with its own growth points or pseudobulbs. That is absolutely correct. And you will see that through the article. Mr. Hankinson actually is an experienced grower. Everything he says is absolutely correct. The problem comes when the author of the article starts to draw some conclusions. So then we reach a point in the article where we learn what we need in order to perform division of an orchid. First, a mature orchid plant, yes, like this Phalaenopsis Asian coral from Crocus. Here is where we stumble upon our first issue. As I was saying, orchids that can be divided are sympodial orchids, not monopodial, such as Phalaenopsis. So a Phalaenopsis cannot be divided like a Cattleya can. Let me just get a Cattleya so I can better show you what I mean. All right, here we have our beautiful Princess Jackie. She is about to bloom. As you can see, this orchid grows in a sort of a linear way. We have pseudobulbs arranged in a horizontal line. Now, this line is actually the rhizome. In order to propagate this orchid and obtain 2 orchids, we can cut this rhizome right here, right in the middle. So we will obtain this side of the orchid as an individual orchid and then this side as an individual orchid. I would not advise to do so when the orchid is in bud because that will stress it out and it can actually give up on the buds. But afterwards, when it starts to vegetatively grow, we can definitely make a division. I also have a video about it, check it down below. It's easy to follow, it's made for beginners. So an orchid like this can be divided as I showed you. An orchid like this, which is a Phalaenopsis, this is a summer bloomer one, as you can see, it doesn't even resemble this orchid. It actually grows from a central axis by producing leaves on top, one on top of the other. And as it grows, this middle axis will grow as well. Now, with this orchid, we cannot divide this axis in two, or I shouldn't say never. There are instances where we can, but let's not go there. I don't want to confuse you. You should not cut the axis in two like this or like this on the orchid because you will probably kill the entire orchid. You will not get two separate orchids. Usually how we propagate Phalaenopsis orchids is through keikis. Tiny little plantlets that can sprout from the flower spike or from somewhere on this stem. And I do have a bunch of videos about keikis. I'll link you to some down below. Separating keikis, caring for keikis, and so on. I have a ton of videos. So when it comes to division, that is the major difference between these two orchids. So while what Mr. Hankinson was saying was absolutely true, he most definitely was now referring to Phalaenopsis orchids. Right, let's carry on with the bullet points. Sterilized pruning shears, and we have a pruning shears from Amazon there. And yes, sanitized or sterilized tools are always great because you don't want to transfer disease in between plants. Small pots or containers, you can buy a multi-pack, blah blah blah. Small or big, it really depends on the size of the orchid. If this Cattleya would have been quite a big bush and my divisions were bigger, I would need bigger pots, obviously. But if we're dividing a tinier orchid, yeah, we need small pots. Anyway, I'm just nitpicking here. Orchid potting mix, absolutely. Each division should be potted in its own pot with its own potting mix. So no issues with everything else. Once you've gathered all of your tools and equipment, you can start propagating your orchids by division. Let's see what that implies. First, prepare. Choose a healthy mature orchid plant that has multiple growth points or pseudobulbs, says Morris. Absolutely. This is 100% true. Pseudobulbs are something very specific to sympodial orchids, such as this one, but not specific to Phalaenopsis. Phalaenopsis do not have pseudobulbs. So you can see how things got just a little bit confusing here with Phalaenopsis, sympodials, Cattleyas. A lot of terms to learn, right? I can see how it's confusing, but it's incorrect. This will ensure that each division or divided section has the potential to grow into a new plant. Absolutely. Time it right. That is a good point as well. The best time for division is typically after the orchid has finished blooming, correct? What I was telling you about this orchid, and is entering in its active growth phase. Good keywords there. This is usually during the orchid's natural growth season. Absolutely 100% correct. So again, as you can see, Mr. Morris absolutely knows what he's talking about. And in the case of our Cattleya here, which we took as example, I would definitely not start to chop away at it while it has buds. I would wait for new growth to start at the base. Each new pseudobulb will start out very tiny on sympodial orchids, and it will grow into this really magnificent growth within a period of 6 to 12 months, depending on the orchid. In this period, it will also start to grow roots. So somewhere within this active growth period, it is a good time to divide our orchid. Number 3, remove the orchid from its pot. Correct. Gently tap or shake the pot to loosen the growing roots. If you know my videos, you know I like to squeeze a little bit on the pot because I use plastic pots and they're flexible. Obviously, if you have a terracotta pot, just shaking it a little bit can actually make those roots detach from the sides a little bit. Also, if you soak the orchid prior to unpotting it, it will help with not damaging the roots as much. Wet roots are a lot more flexible and they don't snap so easy. So it is a good idea to soak your orchid prior to repotting or dividing, or anytime you want to get it out of the pot, it's a good idea to soak it. Separate and divide. You need to check the orchid's roots and pseudobulbs to identify natural divisions or growth points. That is correct. These are areas where the plant has multiple pseudobulbs and a good root system. Using sterilized pruning shears, carefully separate the plant into sections, ensuring that each section has at least 3 to 4 healthy pseudobulbs and a good portion of roots. Again, that is absolutely correct, and if you watch my tutorial that I will link to you down below, that is exactly the rules that I suggest you guys to follow as well. Some people like to make smaller divisions of 2 pseudobulbs. That definitely can work as well, but the orchid might actually grow a little bit slower. 3 pseudobulbs ensures that it has enough stored energy and resources to continue growth almost at the same speed, at the same pace pretty much. So 3 to 4 pseudobulbs sounds absolutely right to me as well. Repot and care. We repot the orchid and then we care for the new division just like we care for the initial orchid as well. So that's about it from the first section of the article. Initially, I thought that the confusion came with the cutting of the flower spike of the Phalaenopsis, but I don't think it was the case. I think the confusion arose from the fact that the author of the article maybe wasn't aware that we have just so many different orchids in our collection that are indeed very, very different between them. Not only between them and other plants, but between them themselves. We cannot compare a Cattleya with a Phalaenopsis, even though they're both orchids, right? So that was a bit of a thing that I noticed with the article, but let us continue. So we reached the section called How to Propagate Orchids from Cuttings, which again sounds kind of unfamiliar to me, because if there's one thing orchid growers are a little sad about is that we cannot really take cuttings from orchids. Because again, both the Cattleya and the Phalaenopsis are not vines, or they don't have long, thin stems. This is not considered necessarily a stem. We consider this mainframe. We consider this a flower spike. It is not a growth stem. So if we cut this and put it in water, it's not gonna produce roots. It doesn't have a growth point. Same with the pseudobulb. We should never cut the pseudobulb and put it in water. It is not a stem. It is a different type of structure. Very, very, very unlike any other houseplant. Same with Phalaenopsis orchids. There's nothing we can cut and put in water from here. Not even the flower spike. It will not produce roots. We cannot cut a leaf and put it in water in the hopes that it will produce roots. No matter what viral misleading videos and thumbnails you might have seen, I've seen them too. No, that's not true. Why would somebody do that? Anyway, we cannot put anything in water or soil and expect it to produce roots from here. Oops, making a mess. Orchids simply don't work like that. I wish they would, but they don't. That's why we don't have a ton of orchids in our collections, because we simply cannot propagate them so easily. So I was a little intrigued when I saw the next section, how to propagate orchids from cuttings. Initially I thought, well, it has to be cutting of the flower spike with the Phalaenopsis because it's a very popular thing to do. But I'll explain what that means. So the article goes on to say there is of course another way when it comes to figuring out how to propagate orchids, taking cuttings. Usually the easiest way to propagate flowers, especially if you take cuttings the Monty Don way, let's click and see what that is. Okay, so it's a very typical cutting that you would perform on roses and other types of plants that can be propagated through cutting, right? This can prove much trickier with orchids. I would say near impossible, largely because these are very delicate flowers, says Christopher O'Donoghue of Gardens Revived, and many orchid varieties will not propagate from cuttings as a result. But we are made to believe that it is actually possible, so let's continue. That caveat aside, you may find that cuttings from Phalaenopsis and other single stem orchids will propagate if you do fancy experimenting. A little side note here that I didn't pick up when I initially recorded this. They're saying there are other single stem orchids. Let's think about Vanda. When it comes to Vanda, no matter how and where you cut that flower spike, you will not even get a keiki nowhere, either on the mother plant, either on the cut stem. So yeah, the cutting of the stem and the keiki and all of those things, They're really applied to Phalaenopsis. None of the other very popular flower shop available orchids can actually produce keikis on their flower stem. There might be other species, but we're not talking about them. So yeah, I just picked up on that. That is a bit of a false statement that slipped in this article. Intriguing. What will we need? A healthy orchid? Okay. A sharp pair of scissors or secateurs. I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that word. I've never actually heard it too many times. Secateurs. Am I pronouncing? I'm sorry, I feel a little stupid. Okay, a plant mister. Okay, sphagnum moss or orchid potting mix, hormone routine gel or powder, an individual 10cm pot. I personally have some doubts, but we'll see how this goes. Before we get started, it's important to remember that your chances of successfully propagating an orchid from a cutting are far lower than they are from division. Absolutely, I would say 99.9% lower. I'm not the one to say 100%. I don't like to go to the extremes because you never know. There are always some special occasions where orchids can really surprise you. So I'm never saying 100, but I'm saying 99.9. Go in with low expectations. So we move on to prepping for this experiment by sterilizing our equipment and selecting a healthy orchid stem. Now I'm curious to know, what do we mean by stem? Because usually what we mean by a Phalaenopsis stem is the central axis, not the flower spike. But that's just like inside lingo in the hobby, I guess. Cut the stem near the base of the orchid and just above a node. This sentence tells me everything that I need to know. They are referring indeed to the flower spike, and we are advised to cut the flower spike towards the base of the orchid, correct? Above a node. Again, correct. Now, why are we instructed to do this? Well, because doing so can promote, most of the times, a secondary flower spike to grow from the node we leave on the orchid. And in some instances, we can even obtain a keiki, which is a baby plantlet, which after a while we can separate and pretty much propagate our orchid. We are talking about the portion that we leave on the plant, not the portion that we cut away. The portion we cut away rarely can sprout anything. And I do know there are videos that suggest you put it in a high moisture environment with sphagnum moss and all of that, and something will sprout. I don't doubt that something will sprout. I do have issues and concerns when it comes to the viability of whatever sprouts, because the new plant will initially have no roots and no leaves and will need the energy provided by the mother plant to produce those structures. Without the structures, it cannot live alone. Without the nutrients, it cannot produce the structures. Whatever's left in that flower spike, I personally doubt is enough to bring that keiki to maturity. That is my problem with that video that claims to produce 100 orchids from a flower spike or something of that effect. It's the fact that whatever starts to grow from there, it's not gonna survive just on humidity alone. So we go on. After that statement, advises Christopher, noting that doing so will allow a new orchid to continue to grow from the trimmed stem. Which part of the stem? That's important. You can leave the bottom half on your orchid plant in its current container, where it will continue growing with the right care. Again, we're getting sidetracked here and confused. The bottom half of the orchid. This implies that we cut our orchid into two. We have a top part and a bottom part, just like we would with a vining plant, right? Let's think about a philodendron type that is a climber. We cut the stem, we have a top part and a bottom part. Orchids don't work like that. So what I get from this sentence is that the author understood that we need to cut the orchid into two, when in fact, what Mr. Christopher was saying is that the flower spike can be cut above a node. 3, give your cutting some TLC. Your cutting can be wrapped, I think we have a typo here, can either be wrapped with moist but not soaking sphagnum moss or planted in orchid potting mix, where with a bit of luck and patience, it may sprout roots and start growing. I personally, from my own experience and all of this over a decade playing with orchids, I don't think that will happen, especially if you put the stem into potting mix. It's just gonna dry out. it will definitely not produce roots. This, in my opinion, is an incorrect statement. I'd cover the cutting with a clear plastic bag to help keep moisture in, says Christopher, and pot it in a sunny location with lots of indirect light. Okay, this to me doesn't make much sense, so I don't understand the context here. I'd cover the cutting with clear plastic bag. Maybe it's the note here. I don't know. If he means the cut part, I personally do not agree with that. I don't think it will sprout, but you know. Keep it warm and moist using a mister when necessary, and you never know what might happen. Listen, that's true. You can do that. You never know what might happen. What I believe is that it will try to grow, but it will not complete its growth. Maybe I'm wrong. I mean, definitely you can play around with that. I would not present it necessarily as a viable way of propagating orchids. I would much rather go the route of cakey paste. If you don't know what that is, I have a video. But yeah, optional, you can dip the end of your orchid cutting in a hormone rooting gel to improve the chance of propagation. Again, I do not agree with this because the end that you're putting in powder there has no root growth points. In order to get roots, we need a stem to form, and that stem is formed by leaves and then roots from the stem. The actual flower spike of the orchid has no power to produce roots unless it has that growth point already started to grow. Of course, once you've sussed, I'm not sure what that word means, how to propagate orchids, you will need to learn how to care for your orchid, which, you know, sensible advice. Can you grow an orchid from a cutting? While you can propagate some varieties of orchids from cuttings, like a vanilla, it is the least successful method of propagation. Absolutely agree with this, and many gardeners would instead advise you to try the division method instead. Absolutely agree with that statement. I think you shouldn't waste your time with this, unless, you know, it's a fun experiment, but don't expect too much. How do you propagate indoor orchids? The easiest way to propagate indoor orchids is to adopt the division method, which basically asks that you separate a mature orchid plant into smaller sections, each with its own growth points. Alrighty, so this is the end of the article. So as you could see, it was a pretty interesting article. What I believe happened here is that the information wasn't really understood enough, which I can totally see how that happens. As I was saying, orchids are very, very different than all the other plants. But at the same time, I do believe when we're putting out articles and videos on the internet, I take my job very seriously, by the way. We need to be sure that we know what we're talking about, and if we're not sure, you know, at least mention it. Mention that, listen, I've heard about this, but I'm not sure about this, or at least try to not put our input as much. If we are taking quotations from people who know, and obviously there were people quoted here and interviewed here who did know what they were talking about, maybe we should ask them more questions and, you know, try to make the article more from their perspective than add our own creativeness to it, because it's really no shame not to know something about a subject. Absolutely no shame, but I think we should be a little bit more careful what exactly we put there and just withhold some stuff when we don't know. I mean, I would never try to give you advice on reblooming a masdevallia. Not never, maybe if I have success with it, but as of this video, I would never tell you how to rebloom masdevallias because I have no idea. I don't have success with masdevallias. They're cool growers. I live in an oven. It's the same thing. I will tell you, I read this, I read the other, I'm gonna try this, I'm not sure, but I think this will work, but I don't go and say, this is how you do things, because the truth is, I don't know what the heck I'm talking about. So, yeah, that was the video for today. What do you think about this article? Have you read other articles that are just as confusing as this one? Because in my opinion, if you're a beginner and you don't really know exactly the structures of an orchid or how they grow, you would be very confused because you're gonna read terms like stems, pseudobulbs, nodes, rooting hormone, and so on, and you're gonna look at your orchid and be like, oh, I'm gonna cut the pseudobulb. And you should never do that. So yeah, I think it's a little bit of a confusing article. And if anybody from this publication is watching, you know, I hope this kind of cleared up some things. And if you want to edit the video, I think you should, to be fully honest, and maybe get in touch with the people you interviewed for more clarification. And I think it would make for a better article overall. But yeah, as I was saying, in the end, this video is not to shame articles. This is not the only article. This is actually one of the better articles I've read, because it does interview people who know what they're talking about. I've read some that are, oh my goodness. And if you compare them to some videos on YouTube, oh my goodness, the misinformation there. So it's in no way meant to shame anybody here, but I do want to raise a little bit of a warning sign that, hey, maybe if we're not sure what we're saying, maybe we should leave the experts, give more information and ask them more than go ahead and assume some things. Right, so that is about it for today. Let me know if you've enjoyed this type of video, because guess what? I get all sorts of Google recommendations of articles and I'm always like, should I talk about them? Should I not? Do you guys enjoy this type of video? Let me know, because I can do it more often. I find it interesting. In the end, it's informational. It's a source, let's say inspirational source material for me to better understand where I should talk about what and what are the things that people don't really understand, so I know how to better do my videos. So I enjoyed this video, but let me know, did you enjoy it? Righty, so with that said, thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed today's video. You have the article linked down below. And yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comments. With that said, I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you next time. Bye!